This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It's 4 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Let me just read you one paragraph, one sentence even, from the Sunday Times yesterday, who have been working with Channel 4's Dispatches programme on an investigation into what they call the Duchy Files. It's just, I mean, it is truly extraordinary. Over 5 months, we identified 5,410 landholdings, mineral rights and properties held by the Duchy of Lancaster on behalf of the King and the Duchy of Cornwall for the Prince, and then examined business agreements and leases linked to these plots. I've lost the room, right? That's quite dull. Sounds a bit dry. What's he doing? Just listen to this sentence. These contracts show the duchies generate profits by charging the army, the navy, hospitals, the prison service, schools and councils for the right to use lands, rivers and seashores seized for the duchies in medieval times. I have absolutely no idea what the phone-in is going to be today, but I felt that this was a story of such remarkable relevance to so much that we talk about together that it would be profoundly remiss of me not to discuss it today. These contracts show the duchies generate profits by charging the army, the navy, hospitals, the prison service, schools and councils for the right to use lands, rivers and seashores seized for the duchies in medieval times. The Duchy of Lancaster raised, wait for it, £27.4 million for the King last year alone, while the Duchy of Cornwall raised a cool 23.6 for his oldest son, and this allows them to pay for their private homes, their personal income and their staff. The annual declaration includes only very, very basic details of assets and activities in annual reports. I'll give you an example. Duchy of Lancaster has a deal with Guy's and St Thomas's NHS Trust in London that will charge the NHS. Think about the budget and the importance of raising more money for the NHS. The Duchy of Lancaster, as in the King's side hustle, will charge the NHS £11 million over the next 15 years for the right to park ambulances in one of its warehouses. The Duchy of Cornwall, which is Prince William's side hustle, receives rent for Dartmoor Prison in a contract under which the Ministry of Justice will pay £37 million. The reason I say I don't know, people are telling me not to forget the RNLI. I might allow a caller to bring that particular element of the story to our attention, because it's one of those stories that is almost impossible to get a proper grip on. The royal family are sold to us as paragons of patriotism, right? They are the very pinnacle of national pride. You cannot criticise the royal family without running a risk of being treasonous or being accused of treachery. So I don't know how naive it is to therefore presume that they would do more than everybody else to uphold the sort of values and indeed institutions that we consider to be crucial to our national infrastructure. I don't know off the top of your head what sort of institutions you'd put in that category. How about the army, the navy, hospitals, the prison service, schools and councils? You see, this is probably the best way to convey the size of the story. So I read out those things and you see people and you see organisations that are dedicated to the public good, right? The army, the navy, hospitals, schools, councils, even the prison service. You make a list of those things and ordinary people see them as things that we have to pay for the public good. Things that I suppose in a slightly less bent country we'd be proud to pay for. I'm glad that my taxes go towards the Navy. I'm glad that my taxes go towards the Army, the NHS, the education system, even the prison service. These are things to which we contribute in expectation of a return, should we ever need them, or a social benefit, should we not ever need them. King Charles and his son look at those organisations as profits, as potential profits. How much money? Do you think they compare notes over Christmas lunch? How much money did you make out of the NHS last year, Pops? It's just extraordinary. At least I think it is. I need to give a quick shout to my mum, actually. I to tell her that she's not actually going mad. I spoke to Mum on Friday after the show, and she said, I saw you on telly last night. And I said, no, you didn't. She said, you were in that Prince William homelessness documentary. I said, no, I wasn't. I categorically would remember if I'd contributed to a Prince William. And poor old Mum, she'd be sort of nodding off in front of the telly, began to wonder whether she dreamed the whole thing. It turns out I was in it. And I should have known. I was told about it months ago. But just a little clip of me reading out something from the chap that runs Republic, Graham, who runs Republic, and just pointing out that there's something... What's the word I want? There's something incongruous. That's a nice word, isn't it? There's something incongruous about Prince William, laudable though the impulse is, tasking himself with solving homelessness when he is taking £23.6 million from a duchy that generates profits by charging the army, the navy, hospitals, the prison service, schools and councils for access to property seized by his ancestors in medieval times. The other reason why I said I wasn't quite sure what phone-in we were going to have today is because I don't know quite what to say next. I don't want to draw too heavy parallels with Trump, but when you listen to Trump supporters and you realise there's nothing he can do that would shed support. Remember, he said himself, he understood this in a way that I don't think normal people ever could. He could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single vote. I have a slightly unhealthy fascination with how far capped offers, forelock tuggers and client journalists will go to defend the indefensible. I'm not quite sure how you'd how would you even begin to defend this in a country that we've, if we didn't know already, then we've learnt since the budget last week, is in dire need of financial injection, dire need of public service spending, to discover that the people for whom we wave flags whenever they get married or have a baby are, siphoning epic sums of money from institutions and organisations which we support by either paying tax or donating. That's the bit I can't get my head around. Every single institution on this list, we support by either paying taxes or donating on our taxed income to charities like the RNLI. And these guys, they take money out of it. Now, I've told you before, and I will tell you again, historically, I'm not very good at royal phone-ins. Right? But there have been some exceptions, I guess, in recent years. The old adage hasn't proved as true, or the old tradition hasn't proved as true. But I think this might be why, because this is so obviously egregious that you almost can't go there. This is an inequality so baked into our society that you can't quite imagine anything ever being different. Do you see what I mean? It's as if you're being presented with something so utterly hideous. Institutions that we support by paying tax and making donations. The king and his son are milking on an annual basis in return for an ancient privilege stolen during medieval times. And I wonder whether deep down we all know what the royal family represents. You know that hymn I got obsessed with a few years ago? Not the hymn itself, everyone likes all creatures great and small, but that little verse that no one knew about, or that we'd all forgotten about. The rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate, God made them high and lowly and ordered their estate. In an increasingly godless world, how do you keep this sort of inequality in place? You can just about understand how you get away with it by saying, oh no, I know it might look unfair to you, John, but it's what God wants. God ordered their estate. It might look a little bit unfair to you, lads, but hey, this is what Jesus would want, where he's still walking among us today. He likes his old kings. He likes it. I mean, the Bible doesn't really support the idea, but you can just about see how the fear of eternal damnation or whatever else it might be. The problem is that I don't like the way this story is reaching me. I don't like the way my mind is going this morning. I don't like being the person that points out how ridiculous and miserable and hideously unfair this whole thing is. Which is why I've said now 4 times, I don't quite know what the phone-in is. I think it's this. It's why have we, even if you're not a massive Republican or a massive Royalist, why have we got such a problem with criticism of the royal family? Let's do that first. 0345 6060 973. But do you know what I really want to do? I want to do that thing that I hardly ever do on the programme, which is essentially just lick my finger, stick it in the air and see which way the wind is blowing. I think, let me go straight in on this, I think this is one of the grimmest things I've ever read about my country. In the context of no laws being broken, something that's happening in plain sight all of the time. I can't quite believe that I'm reading about these sums of money being trousered for essentially just owning stuff, land holdings, mineral rights, properties, but taking money from organisations and institutions that the rest of us support by... I'm going to keep saying this. I can't get past it. When was the last time you made a donation to a charity? When was the last time you signed a cheque for your income tax if you're self-employed, or looked at your pay slip and balked at the amount of money making its way to the Treasury? You know my view on this. My view is quite rightly. But the King and the heir to the throne look at all of these organisations and see pound signs. So I want to do that thing I never do, which is ask you how disgusting you think this is. 0345 6060 973. They are completely taking... I even want to say the rude word here. I won't, because Keith will have a moment. They are absolutely taking the mickey. This is completely indefensible, right? Normally you'd wheel out some has-been from the old royal lobby and they'd start talking about, well, imagine if... I don't know, John Major was president. How would you feel about... I mean, it's a meaningless argument in the context of whether or not this is epically unfair. Well, it's the best of the bad sis. Other countries have got rid of their royals. They're lobbing mud at the Spanish royal family this weekend when they turned up at the scene of the floods we were talking about on Friday. But do you ever get this feeling that something is so impenetrably awful that you don't know where to start? That's the only reason I drew a parallel with Trump. It's like, well, how do you stop? How can anybody not think this is outrageous? How can anybody see a headline, list of properties that earn millions for top royals, and you think to yourself, oh, that's fair enough, probably renting out a few palaces on Airbnb or something. And you read what the properties are, and you learn that they're charging the army, the navy, hospitals, the prison service, schools and councils for the right to use lands, rivers and seashores seized for the duchies in medieval times. We've not changed at all, have we? If King Charles wanted to chop his wife's head off because he suspected she was having an affair, there'd be people in my profession who'd wave that through as well. Well, I'd be perfectly reasonable. He's the king after all. She should have kept her knickers on. It's absolutely extraordinary, this level of deference. And it takes a Rupert Murdoch newspaper to do it. Murdoch, as ever, knows exactly where his bread is buttered, but I think in his bones he's probably a Republican, don't you? Probably thinks he should be king. Kind of practically is. You look at what's been visited upon the country as a consequence of his power and influence. It's just jaw-dropping, right? Let's have a quick look in my... inbox for somebody who... Here we go. So here's someone saying, it's not disgusting at all. They own the land. The organisations that are paying them rent are welcome to go rent from another private landlord. Yes, that's the point, that royal families shouldn't be just another private landlord. Those of us that pay tax and donations to keep these institutions afloat, I think, are understandably staggered that the king and his son see them as cash cows, see them as profit channels, see them as side hustles. 19 minutes after 10 is the time. Phone lines are open. How outraged are you? There you go. I mean, but also, you know me, I like to do the silly stuff, the deeper stuff, the more nuanced stuff. Why? If you're explaining this to somebody, I don't think coma works on this one, does it? Someone who's just woken up after 20 years. There's someone who's just arrived from I don't want to say a normal country. I just don't understand how our country blithely accepts this. How it's as much a part of the furniture as oak trees and park benches. What's that you say? Oh, yes, the king and his son take millions of pounds from institutions that the rest of us support by paying tax and making donations. How do you explain that to an outsider? Is it why do we put up? Yeah, I think it is. Why do we put up with it? Answer, well, I've only known about it for 24 hours, James. Give me a chance. But you're not going to take to the streets, are you? You're not going to start throwing mud at the royal family, as they've just done in France this week, and nor, for the record, do I want you to. But what does it do to a country to have this level of epic inequality, this sort of lionization of greed baked into our social system, so that the people at the very, very top are the greediest people in the country? And they're quite happy to take cash from the pockets of charities that the rest of us actually donate to, and then make a documentary about how they're going to solve homelessness. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. 20 minutes after 10 is the time. Make it make sense. There it is. We got there in the end. Give me a ring now. Make it make sense. That's your challenge.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 10 is the time. Have I ever done that before? Have I ever done make it make sense as a topic? I think we can add it to the list, I think. It could be a skeleton key to unlock quite a lot of concepts and issues. But make it make sense. Mikey's had a go. If you were to design a country from the ground up, James, the idea of having any kind of hereditary head of state would be absolutely mad. The royal family's greatest defence is the fact that they are literally the status quo. Don't send me any jokes, all right? I don't want any jokes at all about Rick Parfitt or the rest of it, okay? And speaking of misspeaking, I think I said France instead of Spain. Obviously, in the context of what you do with the royal family, France teaches a rather different lesson of history than Spain currently does. 23 after 10 is the time. Make it make sense. The royal family, the king and his son, take millions of pounds from institutions that the rest of us support by paying tax and, crucially, I would have thought, making charitable donations. Jonathan's in Croxdale. Jonathan, what would you like to say? Uh-oh. This doesn't bode well. 24 minutes after 10 is the time. Can Jonathan hear me? No, I think we may have a slight problem with our switchboard, which we shall rectify imminently. And in come the status quo jokes, absolutely, inevitably. If you're just tuning in, the question we're asking, in context or in response to revelations this weekend that the royal family, the king and his son chiefly, earn millions upon millions of pounds from contracts that charge the army, the navy, hospitals, the prison service, schools and councils for the right, among many other money spinners, for the right to use lands, rivers and seashores. And I want you to make it make sense, right? Okay, fingers crossed. Jonathan is in Croxdale, but can he hear me?
Hi, James. I can hear you.
Loud and clear. Loud and clear. What's going on here?
I'm leaning right into the window for the best possible signal.
Make it make sense.
It makes no sense, mate, whatsoever. That's part of the problem. But what I was talking to your producer about just before was the fact that these lands don't actually even belong to them in any conventional sense. Like if we abolish the monarchy tomorrow, all of the duchies of Lancaster, the Duchy of Cornwall, all of the Crown estate linkage would just return to the Privy Purse, to the government. You know, even if we accept,
but there'd be national assets as opposed to personal assets.
Exactly. Like there might be some. You know, Prince Charles presumably owns some fancy cars that, even though they were bought with the money that we give him, they are still his personal possessions that he would be entitled to keep a hold of, and presumably several of his properties would be personal possessions that he was entitled to keep a hold of. But the duchies, and more importantly, the Crown estate, do not belong to them in any conventional sense whatsoever. And if there's detractors who are likely to come back on this, I want to say that in the time of George II, the monarchy used to pay for the running of the country out of the monies that they received. In the time of George II, the monarchy went bankrupt, and we, the nation, the government then, bailed him out. In exchange, they took entire possession of the Crown estates. They henceforth belonged to the country. Very cleverly, relatively recently, the royal family re-established the link to the Crown Estates. They now, the amount of money they get is a percentage of the Crown Estates. So in the public eye, I think this was only in David Cameron's time, it's very, very recent. In the public eye, they've re-established this sense that somehow they own the Crown Estate and they very generously give most of it back to the nation. But really,
just a little bit of sleight of hand. David Cameron, of course, exactly. I think had a godfather who worked as an equerry to the late Duke of Edinburgh. I
believe he got his first position as an MP because that equerry phoned up the local Conservative Association.
A job in the Conservative Party, not his later. Someone should write a book about this. Speaking of books, you're an author, Jonathan Trigell, for people who are not familiar with you. Have you written about this? Well, how come you know so much about it? I know inequality runs through a lot of the work that you do.
Exactly. I am very passionate about this. It used to be said that no one should ever mention it within meters of me for
really?
Fear of having a conversation.
And tell me why, Jonathan, because it's not envy and it's not personal.
No,
it's actually a form of patriotism. It's a form of patriotism, I think. It's about the good of the country being appallingly served by this entrenched practice.
It is exactly. It's appalling. As you say, the stuff that I actually saw the Dispatches documentary last night. But the very fact that we're supposed to be grateful to these people. I mean, I always say, how can you? They always say it's about duty and service.
Yes.
How can you be among the richest people on the planet and need to be paid huge sums of money to do a job that many people would give their eye teeth to do? They consider it work to sit in the royal box at Wimbledon and on finals day. No one else on earth would consider that work, but they say it's a duty. But
why do we fall for it then? Why do we suck it up? Why does this? I mean,
no idea.
No, you don't. No, I don't suppose anybody has.
Well, actually, I've got one theory.
Normalness,
which is that they've got the greatest form of advertising ever, which might start to change, but everyone loves money. The earliest rulers who ever minted coins made sure that their head went on the back of it because everybody loves money. So every time you get a £5 note out of your pocket, you're looking, imagine if that said Coca-Cola instead of it had a picture of Prince Charles on it. Money couldn't buy that advertising. And yet we think it's perfectly normal that they're advertised to us every time we pay for something.
Speaking of money, how much do you think the taxpayer is currently funding the renovation of Buckingham Palace for?
Oh, I couldn't guess. I mean, I know it's literally the cost of the Royals is £500 million a year.
Just to tart up Buckingham Palace, the taxpayer is paying £369 million to tart up Buckingham Palace. Listen, it's not personal. And as Jonathan, I thought, very powerfully expressed, it's actually the patriotic position. If you take patriotism as an almost utilitarian concept, the greater good for the greater number in a given country, then royalty is the polar opposite of patriotism. Especially when it turns out that the organisations we fund by paying taxes, which of course the King and his son only do voluntarily, and I don't think Prince William even publishes his tax return, we support these organisations with our donations and our taxes, and they take money out of them. 10:30 is the time. Make it make sense. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:33 is the time. Brendan, you're absolutely right. This subject, he writes, goes to the very heart of so many of the subjects you discuss. Next time, Brendan, can you put we there? Make me sound declamatory. So many of the subjects that we discuss, Brendan, surely. And he concludes it's the basis of cap doffing and forelock tugging, surely. It's just crazy. It is, isn't it? So, I appreciate some people think that others are born better than them. And, of course, by dint of believing that others are born better than you, you become more susceptible to the idea that some people are born worse in the context of political rhetoric, not normally foreigners. That's how you uphold this kind of system, by telling people who've got very little, not only that they're better than the people over there, but also that the people over there are going to nick what they have got any minute now. And that way you stop paying attention to Someone's just sent me a list of all the dukes. There's 20 dukes here. And the acreage that they own. It is extraordinary. That old line that I used to delight in from the last Duke of Westminster when he was asked for advice on wealth, told the person asking him, my advice to you, old boy, would be to make sure you have an ancestor who was best friends with William the Conqueror. It's not very funny, is it? when you read a line like this in the Sunday Times. These contracts show the duchies generate profits by charging the army, the navy, hospitals, the prison service, schools and councils for the right to use lands, rivers and seashores. This bit here, seized for the duchies in medieval times. Oh, John's in Fitzrovia. John, what would you like to say?
Well, I mean, funnily enough, you just said something about seized for the duchies in medieval times.
I did.
Well, you did. Now, it's interesting because a lot of people tend to forget that the duchies of Cornwall and Lancaster were abolished after the Civil War.
Right.
Completely. They were completely abolished, dismantled. What we have today are essentially kind of welded together bits that look like the duchies. They've got the same name on, but essentially they were assembled from parts after 1660.
Okay.
So they're really like a kind of an old, dodgy used car, you know. And it was assault to the monarchy to give them notional personal incomes. But it's only in relatively more recent years that these have become honed as really sharp, highly developed property portfolios, which are generating, you know, give or take, 25k a year for the heirs to the throne and the monarchy. They don't need that. There's no reason that in any way why they should be getting that kind of income.
So
it's just crazy.
The other newspaper I saw today has got an article by James Dyson, who, of course, encouraged everybody to vote for Brexit and then moved his business to Singapore, complaining about inheritance tax changes being brought in by... I see the two stories in tandem to each other, actually.
I mean, with James Dyson, I thought it was rather quaint that he described himself as running a family business.
A family business, yes.
Yeah, please, you know.
Well, in the sense that the royal family...
Produce a new range of tiny electronic violins.
But this is very good, well played. So this is a family business as well in that context. The royal family becomes a family business. What we're doing is the reason I mentioned Dyson is because the Times today affords him a kind of gravitas and reverence that I don't think he deserves. But of course, if we're going to talk about reverence that individuals don't deserve, the royal family wrote the bloody book, didn't they?
Yes.
And so all they've done in the period you describe, we go back over 150 years, is they've essentially pursued wealth or employed people to pursue wealth on their behalf. Yes. In precisely the same way that a Jeff Bezos or a James Dyson or an Elon Musk might have done with the same.
Totally. I mean, you've got to remember too that in rather more sort of lax times when we weren't keeping our eyes on the ball, you had people like Victoria and Albert who were playing their own tiny violin, saying that they were virtually penniless and they couldn't keep up with the sort of, you know, the Chumley Warners or whatever.
Yes.
And basically,
the Dukes.
We bought vast amounts of money, by today's standards, millions, out of the civil list, which they weren't entitled to, in order to build up the so-called, you can't see my air quotes at the moment, but the private estates of Balmoral, Sandringham and others. So they've been, you know...
Is Windsor private estate? Is Windsor... So what you're referring to, and I didn't know this until I attended, I can't remember what it was, I got a very nice invitation to the Albert Hall, and someone told me that the reason why the Albert Hall was built with public subscriptions, so until relatively recently you could decorate your box if you owned a box however you wanted, so all the boxes were different, because Queen Victoria had spent all her money on building that big golden statue of her late husband on the lawn outside.
Yeah, but she wasn't really using her own money. She was using state money.
Well, she still ran out.
Yeah.
What's your interest, John? I asked the last caller this as well.
I speak with a bit of a long-term interest in this.
Clearly.
I started off many years ago as coordinator of Republic back in the early 1990s.
Oh.
I was doing media stuff back in the 90s, in the early 2000s, until I handed over to the great Graham Smith, who's of course carried on the business.
Indeed, and it was Graham Smith I was quoting the other day when they stuck it in the documentary, and my poor old mum nearly had a senior moment. So why, if we were to turn the clock back, we all grow up in the same country, we all grow up in the same society. Why do some people, and for the purposes of this conversation, you and Graham, and Jonathan, our first caller as well, why do you feel it? Why do you think you feel this obvious injustice so keenly, while so many do not?
I don't know. I suppose the obvious thing is that long ago I studied law and history.
Yes.
And in so doing, I was covering British economic decline. I was studying that in the 70s, so I've been at this quite a while. And what struck me more than anything was the fact that as a country, we've failed to upgrade our institutions. Partly because we haven't had to. We haven't suffered revolution, we haven't suffered defeated war, so we've kind of let them carry on, ticking over.
How interesting.
As we had. And also, the only thing I could get involved in a long time ago was constitutional reform, which I felt was absolutely pivotal. And that's what got me involved in all of this.
And so again, that comes from a position of what we would traditionally call patriotism or national concern for the nation. Interesting as well. I know that a lot of Jonathan's work looks at industrial decline. Interesting that you both come at it from a similar position of concern for the country. And the greater your concern for the country, the more anomalous and possibly scandalous this sort of status quo becomes. So why the heck? What great calls we're having today. Pressure's on Michael in Birmingham now, not to let the side down. Michael, what would you like to say?
Thanks, James, for having me on. I've been a fan for a very long time, apologies if there's a little bit of nervous.
It's only me. It's only me. It's not as like you're going to get your head chopped off for contributing to this conversation. That stopped being true about 400 years ago, Michael. So fill your boots.
I'll fill my boots. Appreciate that. So I think it's important to remember what monarchy is. Sorry to go a little bit back without too much.
No, of course.
Normal context. It's people that were able to build up wealth cumulatively, probably through the agricultural factors, build societies, and then own everything.
Yes.
That's essentially what it is throughout whole history.
And when you needed more stuff, you'd go and invade someone else and hopefully overcome them and start taking revenues from their lands as well.
You're entirely correct, yes. And I think if I can compare the royal family to my own family and the other similar sort of situations, is that if I look at the things that my parents or uncles or whoever have enjoyed, I want that as well. And familial relations kind of matter in that respect. So if someone had a nice car, I'd want it as well. It is a mistake to think of the royal family of anything different. For example, Charles I didn't like the idea of being beholden to Parliament. Richard II didn't like the idea of being beholden to the peasants and the peasant revolt after the Black Death. And although I don't know the details of this story, I suspect there's a little bit of subconscious yearning for privileges enjoyed before essentially more accountability was put.
This is the psychological allure of inequality for people who are on the wrong side of it.
Depends what you mean.
Well, I'm thinking of that Steinbeck quote that I overuse horribly about there being no such thing as, because I'm wondering how can this be sustained? How can people be comfortable with it? There's no such thing as poverty in Dust Bowl era America, just temporarily frustrated millionaires. So people look at it and think, well, I'd like that. If the cards had been dealt differently, I'd love to have that. And therefore they're supportive of the actual status quo.
Yes. And I suppose there's an element. Well, I think the most important psychological point now, today, and what I resonate with is that to the extent that the royal family are useful, and it's not always been the case, is that they are an idealised version of what we could be and what we would be if we were stable. And that's why we have to fight this particular aspect of what's going on, because essentially they're being mean landlords. Essentially, this is the way I see it, is that they're getting a cut every time these infrastructures are being used, and the way that we are now, and our collective consciousness about what we're currently thinking, concerned about, and angry about, is that because that is so. Not in line with what we think, but that's why we've got to fight it.
The country's a con trick, isn't it? Everything we think we know about our society is made is rendered nonsensical by what actually goes on. I mean, the idea of aspiration, it doesn't matter how. It's why the odd Dyson comes along and manages to accrue £500 million and then starts whining about being expected to pay some inheritance tax on it. But actually, the system is dedicated to sustaining these family fortunes through the generations.
Yes, through the generations, it's a very, very important thing. And there's generational envy, even more recently. Wasn't there a big fuss about the Royal Britannia yacht being
indeed there was, yeah. They felt that was an appalling infringement of their sort of God-given rights to rule, the idea that the taxpayer should carry on funding a massive boat for them to float around the world in. This is when I always think of trees, Michael.
Yes.
I always think of trees. When you just said you compare it to a normal family, I always think of trees because, again, there will be the occasional anomaly who creeps through the net. And Michael Heseltine happens to have planted a magnificent arboretum. But generally speaking, if a family is planting trees on its estate to improve the view, they're doing that for their great-grandchildren, confident and secure in the knowledge that their great-grandchildren will still be living a life beyond the dreams of the average resident of this country 150 years hence when the tree comes into fruition.
I think that's a good point. And the only thing that comes to mind from my side of things is that in Outlander, which is a great series coming to an end soon, that there was a moment where the Duke of Sandringham said, "Times are very hard at the moment. The cook only comes 3 times a week."
Well, those Dyson-branded tiny electric violins have never been more needed, have they? One thing, just to go a little bit off-piece for a while, I don't know much about Richard II, but I do wonder whether that informs some of what Shakespeare did in Coriolanus. So you always have to remember who was watching these plays when he wrote them. Coriolanus, a really tricky play. There's a brilliant production of it on at the National at the moment. But the idea that the ruling class should pay any heed whatsoever to the peasants is at the heart of Coriolanus' sort of dramatic tension. And I hadn't heard it historically contextualized before. And I wonder whether Richard II is actually the answer to that little riddle. So thank you for that, as well as the rest of your call, which did indeed keep up the extraordinary calibre of contribution so far. It's just me letting the side down.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:51 is the time. Just to give you a quick heads up on some other stuff that we'll be doing on the programme today. There's an extraordinary story breaking in Israel about a potential leak of classified documents from Benjamin Netanyahu's office and manipulation of information. Well, we'll find out more from Noga Tarnapolsky, who often steers us through matters Middle Eastern. We'll talk to her at about 12:45. And then how shocked would you be if I told you that Trump campaigns had received significant sums of money from what we loosely describe as Tufton Street donors. So Tufton Street is a street in Westminster around which many secretly funded lobby groups that like to call themselves think tanks and sundry other fancy titles congregate. How surprised... Well, anyway, you can find out more about what Trump campaigns have received from Tufton Street donors over the last 10 years with the inimitable Peter Geoghegan at about 11:45 today. Before that, the weirdness, really. The weirdness. You don't have to have personal beef with any members of the royal family, although obviously you've been encouraged in recent years to despise Prince Harry and especially his wife for reasons. But the institution is not the individual. And it is the institutions of the twin duchies of Lancaster and Cornwall, respectively, that derive tens of millions of pounds of income for the private homes of the royals, and for their personal income, for their personal staff, from doing, among other things, taking money from the prison service, the army, the navy, hospitals, councils, for the right to use lands, rivers and seashores seized for the duchies in medieval times. Even things like crossing rivers. They make revenue from toll bridges, from ferries, sewage pipes, pubs, churches, village halls, distilleries, gas pipelines, rental homes and wind turbines. And what I like about this story, for want of a better word, is the idea that, you can't really argue this is all perfectly normal. Someone tried right at the outset of the hour, but only on a text. I don't think they thought things through. This is all perfectly normal. They all behave like this. Except they don't, because the royal family, by definition, through history behaves more successfully in this way than anybody else. Otherwise, there wouldn't be the royal family anymore. So make it make sense. Another Jonathan. Well, I think we've had 2 Jonathans and a John today. It's getting ridiculous. This one's in Amersham. Jonathan, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello.
First-time caller and all that.
Welcome, and all that.
This story makes me incandescent with rage. The obscenity of us having to pay money for land that they stole, many years ago, is just my blood pressure is going through the roof, and it.
See, this is the logical reaction. I think this is the logical reaction. I think in an objective universe, if we could operate in a form of intellectual vacuum, and I introduced the stimuli to the subject, in this case, the subject being you, this should be the reaction, shouldn't it? Because of the sort of natural justice and logic of it all.
Well, the subject is performing as expected in this experiment. James,
but why isn't everybody?
Because we have been brainwashed over decades or centuries. I mean, I used to be indifferent to the Queen, but I think since she's gone and more of the shenanigans that happen in the background that are exposed, I think we should have a nationalised royalty. We should have all their assets under public control. We should say you can have 2 nice houses. We'll pay you £10 million a year, the King and the Queen, and you can come and wear your silly hats and funny clothes when we ask you to.
And you can take it or leave it.
Command you to, not ask you to.
And you can take it or leave it. And if they leave it, can we all apply? Can we have an open application process?
We could have a ballot or something.
Nigella Lawson, if she fancied it for me.
It protects us from the idea of having President Johnson, which is,
which is a slightly chilling prospect, very Halloweeny. What does it do to the country? Because you describe accurately the injustice of it, but what does it do? What does it bake into a society that is so insidious, do you think?
Well, I think it's the hymn that you were talking about earlier is that
it consigns
us should stay in our places. They're there ordained by good, by God, and it is the right and proper thing. And really, they can do what they please because that's what their position entitles them to do.
And you mentioned Johnson. I wonder whether a politician who acts with such contempt for ordinary people and with such impunity and with such moral depravity can flourish. Well, no, because you'll just say Donald Trump and there's no royal family in America. So it's not as if they've sort of ceded the way for politicians of but in fact the opposite might be true. So I've gone off on a bit of a tangent there.
I don't think I would necessarily agree with that.
No, I wouldn't either. For what it's worth, because I suddenly remembered Donald Trump. So the idea, you couldn't possibly have a politician as awful as Boris Johnson if the royal family hadn't already made I suppose you wouldn't get a Jacob Rees-Mogg in a normal country. You wouldn't get someone who's evidently as thick as mince but talks posh and therefore gets treated like some sort of sage. That must be tied into the royal family, the deference. I always remember that. I think it was a Jasper Carrott sketch from one of the first things I laughed at with the grown-ups when a prince had just arrived at university with his bodyguard and he's standing on the balcony or something on his first night and he turns to his bodyguard and he says, "Why didn't you go to university, Keith?" Or Perkins. And the bodyguard replies, "I got the same A-level grades as you, sir." And it speaks to something much more profound than the actual joke. It speaks to absolutely unquestioned, inherent inequality. And you think about where our politics has gone in recent years, I don't know that it is completely fanciful to wonder if you could have one without the other. Jonathan, thank you. Last word on this to Hugh, I think, who's in Battersea. Hugh, what would you like to say?
James, hello there.
Hello, Hugh.
I've been looking forward to this. Here we go. So, James, you may remember I'm a veteran, and for the past 14 years I've been supporting veterans and helping them. And actually, today, of course, is the first day of the week of remembrance. So it's a really important week for our military and veterans and their families. And we all know that successive governments have let them down and failed them. But one area in particular that really makes my blood boil is the whole issue of homelessness.
Yes.
I believe there are nearly 2,500 homeless veterans as we speak around the UK. And thankfully, of course, we now have a senior member of the royal family who's the self-appointed head of homelessness, or certainly the fight against homelessness.
Is it in? I mean, can we not hold those two things at the same time? Is it absurd for somebody in possession of what he's in possession of to cast himself as a antidote to homelessness? I think it probably is, but I'd quite like it not to be.
No, what riles me, I'm afraid, is what I'm going to say next, is that the highest demographic for homeless veterans in this country is in which county, do you think?
Well, I'm going to say Cornwall because I'm good at quizzes.
Correct answer.
Is it really? How do you know that? Correct. Are you sure? Because I haven't checked it.
I'm absolutely 110% sure. And last year I went down to just outside Penzance to try and support one of my former soldiers who runs a veterans retreat called Noon Craig. Okay. And they looked after veterans by taking them, back in amongst one another, back out to nature. And all being supported by, charities, good people of the UK, etc. And that very same retreat got thrown off their land and became homeless themselves. And, we wrote to the Duchy of Cornwall on numerous occasions and never got a response.
That's quite a good story, this. They were the landlord, were they, or not?
No, they weren't, but there was all we were looking for.
Oh, so you thought they might help. They weren't the actual...
they didn't... a couple of acres to support this
for free
in helping other veterans.
For free? You're joking, aren't they? They charge you to cross a bridge in some parts of this country. You want to cross a bridge, you've got to throw a few quid to the king.
I just wonder who paid for Prince William and Prince Harry to go to Sandhurst at 110,000, whatever it is, a year.
Well, it's 349 million going on tarting up Buckingham Palace, So, join the queue. It's interesting that. It is indefensible. There was plenty of opportunity for people to come on the show and defend it, but I don't think you can. So what you do is one of two things. You either sort of close your eyes and keep waving your little flag, or you feel you're baked in deference, your baked-in forelock tugging begin to diminish. I think the latter response is going to be of the greatest danger to the royal family. Just the more that emerges and the less mystique that there is, the harder it becomes to sustain the idea that this is in any way justifiable, or I'm not even going to mention the possibility of it being fair. Thank you, Hugh. Thank you, everybody. That was really good, wasn't it? And I haven't even mentioned the state of some of the properties that Prince William rents out, which has led one contributor, Sam, to suggest that he's actually a slum landlord. Certainly when the Labour MP, Jazz Athwal, was found to be the landlord of some very unpleasant abodes, the story received a heck of a lot more coverage than the discovery that some of the rental properties owned by Prince William failed to meet the minimum legal energy efficiency standards for landlords, fuel poverty and mould and damp issues also in play. Nice work if you can get it.
James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 11 is the time. I know, I will, I promise. I'm intending to cover the American election in the final hour of the programme today, but I've spent 10 years trying to find the Rosetta Stone to make sense of things. And listen, I appreciate I'll get lots of text saying Trump's about to win. I can't wait to hear your tears or drink your tears or whatever weird little hobby it is that defines these people. And my attempts to understand you, I think, have been utterly, utterly ridiculous. As we touched upon a couple of weeks ago, that it's really simple. People love it. Love the idea of ordering women to proceed with their pregnancies even if they don't want to, even if they've been raped, even if they are in genuine medical danger. Women already suffering enormously as a consequence of some of Donald Trump's supporters bringing in that stuff. And you know, as I do, or at least you suspect, that Donald Trump's private and personal attitudes to abortion are very, very different from the ones he trumpets in pursuit of votes. People love the racism, they love the misogyny, they love all of it. And I've spent 10 years trying to work it out when actually the answer is plain and simple. We've even got a sort of pound shop British equivalent of it to remind us that it is just about appealing to the very worst of people. And some people will thank you for it and some people won't. So I've got no idea what angle we'll take after 12, I don't think. But it will look in some way at how, or what we've learned And the big question that we can't answer, because it's a complete hypothetical, is what happens if he loses? He's already setting up a narrative of lies, a narrative of theft. Hardly surprising, given that he's told us what he does when he loses elections. He's showed us in glorious technicolor. But that's coming up in the final hour of the programme. Well, it may be, because the other story I was drawn to was Cami Badenoch claiming that reactions to the discovery that Boris Johnson and his mates were partying like it was going out of fashion while the rest of us were prevented even from attending family funerals was somehow overblown, and that Boris Johnson was in fact a splendid Prime Minister. She also rejected the need to churn over everything that had gone wrong with previous Tory Prime Ministers, making a mockery of the old adage that those who do not learn from history are condemned forever to repeat it, which seems quite pertinent in the context of the Daily Mail this morning, which delivers a front page reminiscent of the hyperbole they deployed when greeting Liz Truss and Theresa May. The latter, of course, the steel of the new Iron Lady, and the former, finally, a true Tory budget. The Daily Mail there, in no danger of learning from history and constantly repeating history in the hope of getting a different result. But I digress. Also, farmers in the news still as well, aren't they? Which is a conversation that is a little bit more nuanced than the ones about landlords and private school fees. But I want to turn your attention next to a story that you just heard in the news there. It's a story that is utterly heartbreaking. The story of Holly Newton, stabbed to death by her ex-boyfriend after she ended the relationship. The photograph of Holly that accompanies much of the coverage is unbearable. I don't usually say things like "as a father" because you run the risk of turning into Andrea Leadsom when you say things like that. But I think you are closer to some stories than you are to others. And if you've got a daughter of the same age as Holly, then this is going to chill you in a way that is slightly different from how it will chill you if you haven't. Because you do think there, but for the grace of God, go I, or go we. And the context of coercive control, particularly in such a young girl's life, is one that we do not talk about enough. The Home Secretary has said that she will look into the age at which people can be considered domestic abuse victims after Holly's murder. Holly's family calling for it to be recognised that a domestic abuse victim can be very young. Holly's mother, Michaela Trussler, is campaigning for precisely that legislative change. You've got to be over 16. The abuser and the victim must be over 16 for it to be considered a domestic abuse crime. Demonstrating some of the good that they can use their position to do, Queen Camilla, has also contributed to a TV documentary about this and describes coercive control as almost the most frightening bit of domestic abuse. You meet somebody, you think they're wonderful, attractive, that they love you, and then bit by bit they start to undermine you. Pay attention, because this is the crux of it. They take away your friends, they take away your family, they take control of your money, they start dressing you, and yet all the time, I suppose, people still believe they're doing it because they love them. And that phrase there, bit by bit, is the phenomenon to which I would like to turn your attention next. Bit by bit. How many times do we observe together that something that's happening today would never have been permitted if it had been announced outright at the outset? You know, the slow, incremental creep towards the bad stuff, whether it is in the context of criminality or whether it's in the context of politics. You know, the idea that if they announced what it was going to look like at the end on day one, that we'd be all right with. Look at the royal family. The royal family is a perfect example of this. 1,000 years of incremental dial turning to the point where suggesting that it's ridiculous and should be got rid of now sounds offensive, sounds a bit, because it is just so normal. It's so baked into what we are. In the context of coercive control, I am not interested in how it ends, because I am interested in how it ends, but for the purposes of our conversation, I don't think that the most helpful element of this is how it ends, because we know how it ends. It ends with crimes like the one that Holly is a victim of. I'm interested in the much, much earlier stages. Children are getting into relationships much younger now. That's a cycle. Children would get into relationships much younger in previous generations, but cyclically speaking, Holly's mum has said they get into relationships much younger and they can be victims of domestic abuse. We don't talk about it, especially as so much abuse goes on in families, or we spend an awful lot of time addressing what we used to call stranger danger. But the idea that we could be talking to our children about what red flags are is one that I really salute Holly's mum and stepfather for bringing into the public space. Her stepfather, Lee Trussler, said, I think if Holly had known what to look out for, the relationship would have ended a lot sooner than it did. So they use the phrase red flags. I want you to talk to me about the earlier signs of coercive control as opposed to the stuff which would have all of us responding in the same way. We'd all respond by going, that's bloody outrageous, or that's disgusting. Because you can't understand how the outrageous stuff happens unless you see it as the slow increase, the slow turning of the dial from the stuff that is not immediately outrageous. The things that in retrospect you can see are warning signs. You may not be ready to talk about your own experiences, your own relationships in this, but I can speculate about one thing, and that is that you, as a survivor of a coercive control relationship, can't quite believe what you put up with. I think that moment, and I've spoken to people about this, that moment of liberation must be quite extraordinary when you suddenly realize that because of what I'm trying to articulate as the incremental introduction, because it had happened in stages, it had happened slowly and in stages, that by the time you got to the end game, you'd lost the ability to be fully shocked by what was going on, which would include violence, wouldn't it? Somehow reaching you as an expression of love, or it's proof of how much he loves me. It's proof of how much he cares that he does this stuff. When I was in my 20s, a friend of mine was seeing a man. And when she decided to leave him, and they were living together, but only in student accommodation. They hadn't kind of bought a house together, but nonetheless, it was a big deal, difficult to leave. And she was talking to us about it. She said, he does this thing. And she said, is this normal? I think if you're asking your friends if something is normal, that's actually a bit of a red line, a bit of a red flag. Is this normal? Because she said, every time I go out without him, when he kisses me goodbye and he insists that we kiss goodbye, he runs his hand down my back to make sure I'm wearing a bra. And we're like, I don't think that is normal. I mean, why is he doing that? Well, I don't think it is normal. But in isolation, it sounds relatively trivial, does it? Possibly even a bit ridiculous. What are you worrying about? But if you think about it and you try and answer the question of why is he doing that, it was just one example she had of, what's the word I'm looking for? Concerns about the way he was behaving. So the stuff that is not normal. You say to your friends, is this normal? And the younger you are, this is why I find this campaign so powerful, is that the younger you are, surely the less likely you are to have a clear idea of what is normal and what is not. If it's your first ever relationship, possibly you think that all relationships unfold like this. Possibly you think that all relationships are exactly as yours is, or that behind closed doors, everything is as is in your life. And you don't know unless you talk to someone, do you? It's 11:15. The number you need is 0345 6060973. The question is, when you look back at a coercive relationship that either you or someone you care about was in, because I don't know what hell Holly's parents have put themselves through, but it is going to include the hell of wondering whether they could have done something more, isn't it? That's the nature of our humanity. Could I have done something? Could I have seen something? A tragedy happens to someone you love and you think you could have stopped it. Of course you do. It's usually not true, if ever, but of course you think that. So you could perhaps talk to me about someone you love, as opposed to a relationship you have been through yourself. But either way, the question is this. What are the earlier signs of it? When you look back and think, that's not normal. Why didn't I? Don't beat yourself up. There's no room for that on this programme. But that notion of normality, that early warning of coercion, 0345 6060 973 is the number that you call. I want to say one more thing before you ring in, and that is that I genuinely believe this can happen to anybody. I genuinely believe it can happen to incredibly intelligent and successful women, just as it can happen to women who have had no experience of the outside world at all. Some of these men are master manipulators. What Donald Trump's done to half a country is a form of coercive control, to the point where lots of people will balk at that description and claim that he loves them, and he's the answer to all. If you can do it to a country, you can do it to an individual. But what are the earlier signs? What are the earlier signs that you think that you might be able to help somebody else with? And when you look back, there was nobody there to help you. 0345 6060 973. And I hope this isn't inappropriate. But I am really interested in what it's like if it's your daughter. I think some of the contributions from Holly's mum and stepfather have been so powerful that it takes your mind to that place. What can you do? I don't know that you can do anything. It would depend partly on age, but they think she thinks it's love's young dream. You know he's a wrong-un. What the hell can you do in those circumstances? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's 11:18.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 20 minutes after 11. A couple of texts and then we'll go to Rachel in York. My first boyfriend, from the age of 16 to 19, I'm 48 now, writes Kirsty, was emotionally and physically abusive. It started with love bombing, then a slow drip feed that my friends don't actually like me, my family doesn't understand me, only he does. So I slowly pushed all my friends away as it was easier not to see them, to avoid him getting upset and then later angry and or violent. Your slow boiling frog analogy works so well. I was lucky that I was able to get away from him and rebuild my life. And remember, this is 30 years later, I still have ongoing trust issues. And then Emma writes, my experience happened almost 20 years ago, James. Looking back at the red flags, they did come from the small incidents that chip away at you. It's about your appearance, your intelligence, your personality, how to dress, who to talk to, what to think. So that by the time the physical abuse started, you believe you deserve it. Rachel is in York. Rachel, what made you pick up the phone?
Just because of how important this has become recently in talking with my children, because of my now separation from their father. And it was them who pointed out to me how he treated me was so bad. And that's what made me separate in the first place was that realisation of, I tried everything and the only thing I could do to set a better example for them was to end the relationship. Can
I ask how old they are? I don't want to pry unduly because I know.
I've got one in college, one who's GCSEs, and one junior school.
Okay, so even though they're growing up in the environment that we'll talk about in a moment, you'd done something right, that they knew enough to know that this was wrong.
Yeah, I think, as I said, it's really bizarre how they condition you to feel like how you're treated is right.
Yes.
But I've always educated my children from an early age. We come from an area where, it's very, very little cultural, we don't know many people of colour or that kind of thing. So I've always felt it was so important to educate my kids on all of these things. And I was brought up in a very abusive family.
Right.
And in my mind, because he wasn't as violent as regularly as my dad was,
yes,
it was, and honestly, now after a year of therapy through a wonderful CIC company, it was bizarre as the pennies dropped, and I could see from the outside what I'd become to accept.
Yes. And that's I don't know what the right word is, but I used the word liberating earlier. Just, I don't know, is that the right word?
Absolutely. And, you know, it is. I mean, I'm in a relationship now where, you know, which I never thought would happen, and I was perfectly happy to be on my own.
Right.
I'd done all the work. I was happy. I was focusing on the children. But yeah, I'm a completely different person now, and I don't like to look back too much. Yes, that was 25 years with the wrong person and wasted, and, you know, I wasn't allowed to have a career. That was cut off.
Gosh. Three great kids, though. Nothing wasted about that.
They're amazing.
And also, better late than never. That's what my therapist always said to me. Was that
my mum died.
I'm sorry.
My mum died quite early.
Right.
So now I can look back and say, well, my mum never got to escape, and I did.
So I know we don't want to look back, but I would like to ask about a couple of things that when you look back, you realize, what your children realised was absolutely not normal. That's funny that I said, when you say to your friends, is this normal? But that's why you take the friends out of the equation sometimes.
Absolutely.
So there's no one you can ask whether this is normal or not. But what sort of things, at the lower level of signposts, would you remember?
From the early days, it was, you know, not liking the friends I hung around with. It was things like controlling all of my time, which I just saw as, you know, he loves me, wants to spend time with me. You know, I'd be expected to go to his house late at night, you know, to be there when he got home from work, and that is exhausting. And the more they can tire you out and stress you out, the less clarity you have. And it just becomes normal, and it's just a bombardment of all these things, you know, even down to clothing. You know, I was a very skinny person, not very well blessed, but I would have to be so careful and try every movement in every outfit to make sure nothing was going to be even slightly revealed.
Wow.
All of those things, you know, I don't like you wearing makeup. You don't need makeup. Why are you wearing perfume if you're not going out with me? You know, that's a waste. Tapping into all of those, you know, little insecurities and things.
Until you start behaving in a way that's designed to avoid upsetting him, because upsetting him is so psychically exhausting.
Yeah, I got to the point where I sat there on a regular basis and had to pull myself together to think, it's okay if I'm never happy again, so long as I've got enough energy to care for the children, to do everything they need. And looking back now, I can't believe I thought that was a rational way of thinking, you know, and that I had no other options.
What did the kids do then? What was it that sort of broke the dam, Rachel?
They avoided him all of the time, basically, which you think, oh, maybe it's just that teenage years that, you know, they're hiding in the bedroom, that kind of thing. But it was when they were literally saying to me here and there, I thought I'd done a really good job of hiding the majority of the bad bits. And when they came to me a couple of times and said, you know, why do you let him treat you like that? You know, that you've taught us that's not how we should be treated.
Wow.
And it was like a massive penny dropping of, I've tried everything. I've begged to go to counselling. I've tried to explain everything every which way. I've tried to pander to every whim. And that I had to say to him, you know, I really thought the option was he just needed his space. He was stressed. All of these excuses that they spin. You know, I really thought I could fix it somehow, and they have you believing it's your job to fix it. So
what was the?
Yeah.
I mean, the did you just suddenly? Did you see what I mean? The Gestalt switch that got flicked. So the children draw your attention to it, but then something happened that made you go, up with this. I will not put.
I just had no other options.
I've got to get out.
That's the only thing I can do for my kids.
Right, for them.
Looking to the future, as they got to that age where you're thinking relationships might not be far off, and hearing about their friends being in these negative, abusive relationships, and that panic set in of, I'm setting this example, that's the only thing I can do, is not be part of setting this example of what's acceptable, either to receive or to how to treat people. So,
it is. And no one is underestimating how hard it is. Anybody listening who's absolutely daunted and intimidated, not only by the thought of making the break, but also by the fear of what he might do when you do. I mean, it's huge. And that's why getting someone to talk to is so absolutely crucial. And that, I'm so stupid sometimes. I'd only worked out while I was talking to you why taking the friends and the family out of the equation is so crucial. It's in many ways the only thing that applies in all of these cases. It's to take away any chance you've got of someone giving your head a wobble for you.
Absolutely. They're not there to witness it. They're not there to advise you. So you're so cut off.
That he can then do whatever he wants.
Absolutely. And personally, looking back, I took the violence so much easier because that's so much simpler to see as abuse, but the control and the financial and grinding you down to an empty shell is chipping away, and you feel at that point you don't deserve any better.
Death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, you're brilliant. Yeah. Thank you. That's helped a lot of people listening, I promise. And I'll say it again, and I hope I'm not patronising you, but my goodness me, to have done such an amazing job of raising your children in the environment that they were then attuned to recognise as unacceptable, that's an extraordinary achievement.
Thank you.
Think about it if you haven't already, because it really, really is. 11:30 is the time. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 11, you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We are having a conversation about coercive control of women by men, inspired, if that's the right word, by the murder of a 15-year-old girl by her boyfriend of the same age. And as a consequence of that, Holly Newton's mother is calling for a change to the law, which means that at the moment domestic violence can only be clocked, criminally speaking, if both abuser and victim are over 16. I think it's worth mentioning that this does go both ways. Coercive control by women of men is a thing. It is a real thing. It's just not what we're talking about today. I'm pointing that out politely. I'm not going to. I don't think it would be appropriate to tease or to insult the men who are very cross that we're not talking about how awful women can be. It's just about a 15-year-old girl. If it was a 15-year-old boy, we'd be doing the conversation the other way around, lads. Come on, be better. 11:34 is the time, and the question is pretty straightforward. What are the early signs? Because everybody knows what the end game looks like. The end game is violence. The end game is complete and total isolation. The end game, in the worst imaginable circumstances, is murder. So the things that are in and of themselves not shocking or not that remarkable, but as part of the bigger picture, they are profoundly relevant, pertinent, and indeed revealing. It's eye-opening, writes Claire, that once you accept you're out of the relationship, you notice all the subtle things that have built up over time. I realised when I was clearing out the photos after the relationship ended that in nearly every formal photo I had red eyes or a red nose because he'd made me cry beforehand, and then I'd needed to make myself presentable for the photo so that we would look like the perfect couple, something that my friends always thought we were. They'd tell me how envious they were at what we had. If only they knew. I'm currently happily single. However, I know not all men are like the guy I was with. And this is a really remarkable message from Sarah. I'm currently supporting my abuser's new girlfriend who has reached out to me for help. He was arrested after I broke up with him over a year ago, and the police investigation is still ongoing. Unless you have been through a coercive, controlling relationship, it is almost impossible to understand what it's like. You can't just leave, even though you want to and need to. They hold you in a grip, and every time you try to leave, you feel like people think you're an idiot, so you're embarrassed to reach out. I had nothing left by the end, James, and supporting his new partner now is so difficult. But I'm glad she has me to help her realise she isn't crazy. He is an absolute monster. 11:36 is the time. Helen is in Leeds, staying in Yorkshire. Helen, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello.
Yeah, I've just recently left a coercive relationship with someone that I was with for 2 years. And it was the same sort of theme, really. The biggest thing for me was the isolation. That was when everything changed.
How soon did that start?
So I'd just left a abusive marriage, so I was quite vulnerable. Which this person obviously has, their history is they target vulnerable women.
Right.
And he sort of had a bit of a hero complex, and because I was used to like the bare minimum, I think him coming along, he was 16 years older than me, so you'd think someone being 52 would sort of be sensible and know what they're doing.
Well, I need to remind you. You're speaking to a 52-year-old Helen who is certainly not sensible and has no idea what he's doing. So I understand the mistake on that one. So he love bombed you, did he? Effectively.
Yeah, and then as soon as I moved in, sort of 2 hours away from my family and friends, that's when everything sort of changed, and I started noticing things. He knew about my CPTSD from being groomed by a teacher.
Oh, God.
And all of the lies and things sort of started coming out, and his behaviour just got more and more strange. And, it wasn't until I started telling people that they were like, that's not normal.
So he's cutting you off from friends and family a bit, and controlling what you do. Is it? What sort of things would you say to your friends? You'd say, is this normal? I mean, the ones that you were still in touch with, you'd be able to say, is this normal? He's doing this thing, and I don't know if it's quite right. Yeah,
my job, I'm cabin crew, so I'd come in very, very tired, and I'd go to sleep, and I'd think he'd let me believe I've been asleep for hours, but he'd wake me up after 40 minutes. Or he'd put the TV on really loud, knowing that it would wake me up. Or
why did we think he was doing that?
It's just a control thing. He didn't like the fact he had cameras in the house as well that he would watch me on. I don't think he liked that I was doing something for me.
Yeah. He resented the fact that you worked, and even are we describing a resentment of the fact that you were sleeping because you weren't giving him attention while you were asleep?
I think it was. The thing with him, everything was regimented and to a schedule, and everything was what he wanted. So me saying, I want to sleep and I don't want to have an alarm set because I need to recover, he didn't like that. He'd be like, I'll wake you up in an hour. And I'd be like, well, that's not long enough. It just came to the point where I was just absolutely exhausted and drained. I just didn't get sort of any peace.
Was there a breaking point?
Yeah, so my CPTSD was sort of with bodily fluids. I'd had issues with my ex-husband having addiction and urinating in weird places and doing other things. Okay. And he used to leave tissues with fecal matter on around the house. He'd urinate in cups and leave it next to me.
To trigger you? Deliberately to trigger you?
He'd say that he was just being a smelly boy and that was something that was normal.
So he's completely playing with your mind by this point, or trying to get right inside your head.
Yeah, and I did go to the police, and they were really supportive and told me, obviously, that was when I left. But unfortunately, even though I had a lot of evidence that it was coercive control, they did basically say, unless you've got incredible amounts of concrete evidence, the chance of him getting charged is very slim. And there's 6 of us that have been in a relationship with him that are now quite close friends.
Well, you found out, reached out to each other on Facebook or something like that? Or
Yeah, some of them got in contact with me, and then we've got in contact with others, and we've all been treated in exactly the same way, the exact same pattern of behaviour, and he just gets away with it.
Oh, gosh. Well, I'm so glad you're out of it. I don't know if you're... do you feel relief? Do you feel liberation? Or are you still cross about... I mean, it's going to be everything, isn't it? Every feeling under the sun, I think.
I'm struggling at the moment just because I got a flat. I planned everything from last November, and I got a flat, but I left everything, so I had nothing. And he has caused me financial debt that I'm struggling to pay. And it's the do I break the no contact and sort of confront him and ask him to sort it and ask for my stuff back, which I deserve, or do I just accept that?
Can you get someone else to do that? Can you get someone else to do that?
I could do, and the police have offered, but I just feel like it's an opportunity for him to milk it, because he's just been telling people that I'm mentally unstable and that the reason why I left was because I'm in debt, which is something that he caused.
It doesn't matter what he says, because he doesn't tell the truth, and if people can't see that, that's a them problem, that's not a you problem. I'm in no position at all to give you advice. But I think the police probably are, and if they can go around and get your stuff, I can't see that you'd regret that, even if it gives him some ammunition for his latest grift, his latest manipulation, his latest lie.
Yeah.
Seriously,
yeah, definitely.
Because you deserve it, and if you do it, if you break the no contact, I think you put the ball back in his court, and you don't want to do that, do you?
No, definitely not.
You're a strong woman. You've done amazingly well. Oh, you really are. I'm getting messages from people who would not have been able to do what you've done, and I'm sorry it hasn't been easier for you. I really am. But things will get better. They have to.
Thank you.
That's gravity, Helen. Trust me. As a 52-year-old who doesn't know what he's talking about. You stay safe.
Thank you.
All right. Take care. You. Thank you, Helen. I'm getting more messages on this than perhaps I expected, although I'm getting a few messages, if Helen's still listening, even in capital letters, saying do not contact him. Rebecca is in Nottingham. Rebecca, what would you like to say?
Hello.
Hello,
I suppose in some ways I am the story of it will get better in the end for Helen and everybody else.
Yes.
So my story, when I was 18, I ended up in a coercive control relationship with someone who was 36. It was my first relationship. I'd been a very, very sheltered student. So I'd just finished my A-levels, and I met him through my first summer job that summer. And talking about the first signs and the first things you notice, the first thing he did was set up this idea that it was us against the world.
That's quite romantic, potentially, in the very early stages.
I thought I was head over heels in love. I've got diary entries from that time. I was the sort of person that recorded it in my diary saying, I'm so in love, why can nobody else understand it? This real sense of there's only us, nobody else understands. And I was quite isolated anyway, so I was an only child. My parents were divorced.
Right.
So there weren't a lot of sort of points of references in my life. And then I went away to university, and I'm a state school kid that had just got into Oxford. So he made a point of coming down every weekend and being in my college bedroom with me and telling me how different I was to everybody there and how only he got me, only he understood. And you can imagine that that's really, really enticing in that situation.
Cool. Because you're feeling insecure anyway, and you're feeling a bit... isolated and struggling to get going at college. So to have someone whispering in your ear that it's because you're amazing, it's incredibly seductive.
And I dropped out,
which is what he wanted. Wanted.
Absolutely, but that's when it really started, because then he had me in his house, because I felt so ashamed that I ended up moving in with him because he was the only one that understood. And then from that point onwards, it became anything that you did that might jeopardize the relationship. You'll ruin our relationship if you do that. I was so in love. I did manage to get a degree. He used to drop me off at every lecture and pick me up at the end of it. So I didn't make any friends. Yeah. And then I did manage to get my degree. And when I graduated, I started talking about work. And he said, if you get a job, it will completely ruin our relationship. And that was when the real kind of violent sort of thing started, because I started to want to live the life of a 22-year-old, and he wanted me to stay at home with him all the time. And it starts off with little tiny things like well, where are you going today? What are you doing? Why are you jeopardizing things? Yeah. And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and becomes, we've got this perfect relationship. Why would you be the one to ruin it? Or, you saved my life. You came into my life at the right time. If you ever leave me, I'll kill myself. And it goes from there. And 10 years of my life went to that relationship.
Oh, crikey. How did you make the break in the end? What?
At the end of it, I still didn't understand what I was in. I'd never had any other relationship. I barely had any friends by that point. But I thought I was going mad. And I was so isolated, but just had this real sense of something not being right. And I managed to access some free therapy. And I know you're always talking about how important therapy is. That my therapist said to me, this isn't normal. This is an abusive relationship. And
what did you think when you heard those words?
I thought, well, that's not me.
Yeah.
Domestic abuse is like what you see on EastEnders.
Yeah, or Emmerdale.
That's not this. Yes. Yeah, he's pinned me up. Yes, he's pinned me up against the wall a couple of times. He's knocked me over a couple of times, but he doesn't come home from the pub and punch me. That's that. And I'd never had anything else. So the idea that I could be in an abusive relationship just seemed completely bizarre to me. And then I started to notice all the things. Even for that first therapy appointment, I'd had to keep my phone on in case he texted me so I could text him back straight away.
Because if you didn't text him back immediately, you'd get gypped when you got home.
Absolutely, yeah.
And
even after that... Sorry, go on.
No, you go on. I sense that you're unburdening a bit, aren't you?
No, sorry. I just got this very much. But no, I mean, even after that first therapy appointment, it took me a very long time to leave. Even the things that happened, things like I was on my way to leaving just at the point that his mum was diagnosed with cancer, and he told me he couldn't possibly get through that experience unless I was there with him to help him. And you feel very beholden to someone. I mean, it's the same. From age of 18, and this was by my late 20s by the time I had that first therapy appointment. Took me probably, I think, 5 attempts to actually leave. And even then, he was insisting on phoning me every night for a phone call. I think he always hoped he'd sort of work his way back in. So there was this sense of, where are you? What are you doing? But
you're there.
Yeah.
You're in a better place now.
I'm now very happily married to a very wonderful person who is very confused by things like me saying, oh, I better text you and just make sure you know where I am. He's like, yeah, it's fine.
I wish you could see the smile on my face when you just said that, because I could hear the love in your voice when you described him, and you deserve that. Everyone we've spoken to today deserves what you've now got. And you're right, you are the kind of light at the end of the tunnel for people like Helen, who possibly think at the moment that there isn't any. And she's done the first thing. She's done the hardest bit, right? She's left.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that is the hardest bit. It's the most dangerous bit, and it's the hardest bit. And once you do that, you are on the path. And there's lots of different paths. There's no one way that people come out of this. But there are good people in the world, and there are good potential partners in the world.
And you're one of them.
Yeah.
And you've got one of them as well.
Yeah,
and I couldn't be happier for you. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
No, thank you. It's lovely to hear that. And some people's voices manage to convey so much emotion, don't they? And Rebecca was very much one of those people. And I hope everybody listening who I'm not going to be able to talk to, or who isn't in a position to ring in, can take, because 10 years, I presume there's a bit of that double down syndrome as well. I can't walk away now. I've invested so much. But if our first caller, after 25 years and 3 children, can do it, and if Rebecca after 10 years can do it, and then, no one is pretending for a minute that it's easy, but it means perhaps that you can do it too. Up next, Peter Geoghegan will join us, the editor of the Democracy for Sale Substack, and a tireless pursuer of, well, you'll find out what this particular story is about, but who could possibly have imagined links between the Donald Trump campaign and Tufton Street.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:53. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we continue to wonder precisely how we're going to address the American election in the next hour. I don't know. How do you make sense of it? I feel that we've danced around. Do you ever get that sense that if you just tweaked that a little bit, or turned up the focus on that the picture would become clear of how America can be split down the middle between people that abhor fascism and people that love it? Maybe there's no mystery at all, but we will hopefully find a way into it. It is to the American election that we turn our attention next, because Peter Geoghegan, the author of Democracy for Sale and editor of the Democracy for Sale Substack, has been working in conjunction with our friends at Byline Times on it's a sort of financial investigation, really, Peter. But why did you and Max Colbert undertake this investigation in the first place?
Well, what we were looking at, James, I think some of the same questions that you probably had, like, what's the relationship between American money and British money when it comes to politics? How do these people influence each other? And I've spoken on your show a lot about what we call Tufton Street, these secretive think tanks that don't declare their donors, back Liz Truss, have had a huge impact on the country over the last 15 years. And even though they don't declare their donors, we actually do know some of their donations through the work of journalists. I must admit, I've been one of the people who's probably been really trying to find out their donors over the years. We have a few names. So what we decided to do is actually ask, well, what about these donors? Are they the kind of donors who are giving money to Tufton Street? Are they the kind of people who are also giving money to the Donald Trump campaign, to the Republican campaign? So what we started doing is actually, one thing I will say in fairness to America, they've actually got much better corporate records for this sort of stuff than Britain.
Which is how you found out over the years some of the donations that have gone into the British opaquely funded outfits, because the declaration in America of donations that have been made.
That's pretty much the one of few ways we ever find out. So what we did is we started doing exactly that, looking through the donors that we did have, the names that we had in America, and some of the ones we revealed here in the UK, and figuring out, well, have they given money to the US election? And surprise, surprise, they've given a lot of money to the US election. And would you be shocked to find out they haven't given much of it to the Democrats?
No, good Lord. No, I wouldn't be shocked at all. So who are we talking about, and what sort of sums?
We discovered about $45 million all told.
And to be clear, this is just the stuff you found. So the likelihood is that there'll be a heck of a lot more sloshing around.
Oh, yeah, this is just the few names that we do have on record as giving money to these Tufton Street organisations. We found about $45 million all told. We found one company which people might have heard of, British American Tobacco, makes lots of different cigarettes. They've been funding the Institute of Economic Affairs, which was said to have incubated Liz Truss. They've been funding the Institute of Economic Affairs for about 50, 60 years. They've donated $17 million to the Republicans, including $8.5 million to Donald Trump's Make America Great Again. By contrast, they donated $960 to Kamala Harris, not 960. So that's $17 million versus $960.
Why? Why would they give 960? It's better to give nothing, isn't it? That sounds completely absurd. Sorry, I know this isn't the central thrust of your investigation, but 960, it's like a joke.
I asked British American Tobacco to comment on this story. They have yet to issue a response. If they do, I'd be very happy to publish it. But it's very striking. This is a company with a big interest, very interest in specific policies, giving a large amount of money to Donald Trump.
Give us a reminder of what those policies are. So in the context of British and American Tobacco, it is a fear of legislation that might limit their profitability or curtail their profitability.
This is it massively. In America, it's particular issues. Actually, it's quite striking. There's issues around menthol cigarettes, which are very big in America and are seen as very addictive. There's moves to try and clamp down on menthol cigarettes, which is something British American Tobacco opposes. There's also issues around vaping and other types of secondary tobacco. The British American Tobacco have been quite vociferous. More so, interestingly, none of the other tobacco companies I could find that actually donated, but have been very much through the IEA and others at the forefront of pushing agendas over the last few years. And we've seen this with Donald Trump. That what's interesting about Donald Trump is he's taken large amounts of money from very specific sectors, often people who have an interest in him. We saw it with Peter Thiel and JD Vance. Peter Thiel, the big financier behind Palantir, kind of very strong conservative, very fluid on democracy, it seems. Doesn't seem all particularly keen on it. But he's been really bankrolling Trump, and it looks like the quid pro quo for that is JD Vance. And so similarly, we're seeing here companies like British American Tobacco. What we also saw, fascinatingly, is people who have been small donors to Tufton Street, who are big figures on the American right, big funders who have been massively bankrolling the Trump campaign. I think we spoke on this show sometime last year, James, about the National Conservative Conference, if you remember that.
Yes, I do.
When NatCon, where people like Suella Braverman stood up and said pretty out there things. Well, the guy who's a real founder of that is a guy called Thomas Klingenstein. And he has donated about $10 million to Donald Trump in the last couple of years. He's also bankrolled the Global Warming Policy Foundation, a kind of climate denial foundation on Tufton Street. Similarly, other donors who've given big money to Trump have also been involved in giving money to Tufton Street as well. And what you can start to see in this is how it is really this kind of transatlantic network of people who have an interest in pushing very, very, very specific agendas, which, frankly, here in the UK have not done particularly well at the ballot box. They're not even the kind of agendas that Donald Trump talks about in public. He tries to distance himself with this Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation, this massive radical shrinking of the state, a really conservative worldview. He's tried to distance himself, but when you can see, if you look at the money, is that these people are very much bankrolling him, and they've also been involved in bankrolling British politics.
So I think you've half answered the question I was about to ask you, which was to just sort of précis the common ground. What is the political goal that these people and these organisations are pursuing on both sides of the Atlantic? And you mentioned it hasn't had much success at the ballot box in this country, but it has infiltrated every single level of the media, up to and including, and politics, up to and including Liz Truss's premiership. And I noticed that one of the donors that you identify actually told you that he became a Tufton Street donor after meeting a bloke called Madsen Piri, who founded the Adam Smith Institute. And he wrote in his autobiography about how they'd set upon a very deliberate and highly successful path of seeking to dictate public discourse by being in bed with various other spads and journalists and political figures. So what is the common goal that's shared by all of these individuals and institutions?
I think what you're looking at, I think, when you and I started talking about some of these issues a few years ago, James, people said, you guys are crazy, you're conspiracy theories.
This is true, can confirm.
And then what we saw was Liz Truss's election, Liz Truss's victory, and we saw what was very much that ideology made flesh as Liz Truss. You're talking about taxes for the rich slashed, the state slashed.
No public spending, just let business do whatever the heck it wants. Let wealth, not even business, let wealth do whatever the heck it wants, and everyone else will be golden.
And at the same time, actually massively push back on people's civil liberties and rights at the same time. So it's the two sides of this. And this is what we can see it in Trump very clearly. With Trump, it's very front and centre. Here in the UK, it was a much more clandestine. But as you say, these agendas were pushed hugely here. And I think what we're seeing through this kind of connection is that this network isn't gone. And I think there is, especially when we don't have proper regulation of politics and political donations in this country, there still is that possibility for its influence here as well.
It's a very good point. And we haven't even mentioned the billionaire sanctioned by Ukraine, who features in this article and who, of course, gave £25,000 to the failed leadership campaign of honest Bob Jenrick. But we leave people with something to learn from the actual article, Peter Geoghegan, which you can find both on Peter's blog and at Byline Times. Thank you, mate. Always a pleasure. More power to your elbow, as ever. It is 2 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 6 minutes after 12. John speaks for many people, but obviously not everyone, when he writes, I'm at a total loss to understand why the US election appears to be so close. In a land of 340 plus million people, there is bound to be a certain proportion of knuckle brains, maybe 100,000 at a push. No, it's about 15 to 20% of any given population, John, usually. But 50% of the electorate, question mark? I just don't get it. The evidence against Trump is prima facie and in a full spotlight. Then I remember Brexit and appreciate that some people refuse to see clear evidence. Well, I think of Brexit occasionally. And it's important to remember that people were made unkeepable promises. I know Trump says stuff about bringing down inflation and getting rid of immigrants, and you and I hear that and think surely nobody A, believes it, and B, thinks that these are things he can achieve. He's getting rid of non-existent immigrants when it comes to the ones that are eating the dogs. So I'm with John. That sense of utter befuddlement is as profound. It's more today than ever, because of what he describes as prima facie evidence. It's because you know that if Trump loses tomorrow's election, there is a very real chance that he will claim that he has not lost. 1 in 10 Americans, according to one report this morning, think that civil war could be on the horizon. But you know he will lie. He will lie about the election result. He will claim that he lost. Have a little listen to one of the things that he said at his latest rally in Pennsylvania with regard to, and he's clearly talking about Fox News in this clip, but he's already seeding the ground for claims of a stolen election. And that's, I think, where John comes from with his utter inability to understand how this can be happening, because he's shown you what he does when he loses elections. And, I mean, it's not just shocking that he is poised to do exactly the same thing again. One thinks of Maya Angelou, doesn't one? And she said, when people show you who they are, believe them the first time. Has it ever been more powerful and more impotent? Simultaneously, that observation from the great poet. When people show you who they are, believe them the first time. He's someone that will lie about elections and try to steal power. No, he's not. Prove it. All right, that's what he did last time. Just have a little listen to this and see if you can spot what I spotted.
Oh, if you even mention the fact that there's cheating in elections, they turn you off. I mean, this is supposed to be one of our brave, very brave networks. I won't mention which, but you can imagine. You know, it's one thing when CNN and MSNBC, they're crooked as hell.
So, I mean, the last time Fox reported on Donald Trump's claims that he had lost, an election stolen from him, they ended up settling with the company that made the voting systems for just a cool $787 million. So this is the bit that you can't get your head around, isn't it? He has shown you what he does when he loses. Fox settled that defamation case for $787.5 million, and he is complaining that Fox is not doing what it did last time, when what it did last time saw it hit with a bill for $787 million. It's absolutely extraordinary. So you sit here and you see a man who talks in the vilest terms, but you think back to the impression he did of the disabled journalist or the abuse that he heaped upon the families of the Gold Star military veteran. The man that had died in the service of his country received a Gold Star, the highest honour that a fallen veteran can receive. And Donald Trump insulted his parents. The impenetrability of this collection of facts is what John in Reading is alluding to. I'm less shocked than I used to be by the amount of people that are comfortable with it. The idea that I really like this. And I think we were probably very slow on the uptake of this. I don't want to call it a kind of excessive generosity of spirit, but the reluctance to believe that people like evil is part of the reason why evil triumphs. You know, here is someone offering to be horrible to women. Here is someone offering to be incredibly racist, to deport people, to use the army on your own citizens. And I find it impossible to imagine anybody not being spooked by that. I find it impossible not to imagine anybody looking at Donald Trump and not being disgusted. Because he is disgusting. He is objectively disgusting. Everybody knows that. You know, younger generations are finding on TikTok that recording of him explaining how he routinely sexually assaults women. And they are expressing shock that their parents and their grandparents passed long ago. The idea that that would somehow puncture the balloon. I don't think there have ever been any truer words spoken in the history of politics in the English-speaking world than when Donald Trump said he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single vote. And that is where I'm bringing you back to today as we prepare for the latest attempt by Donald Trump to get into the White House, and we prepare also for the possibility that in the event of him losing, he will try to unleash hell again in the hope of stealing power. So what I think many experts fear or expect would be the idea that as soon as he enjoys a lead, they will declare victory. This is when he lost the plot with Fox last time, because Fox declared victory for Joe Biden. So, and then he wants them to stop counting the votes once he's achieved it. I mean, this is the bit, again, where I turn into Groundhog Day. He says it all out loud. This is what is so impenetrable. It's all there. Here is a man who tries to steal elections. Here is a man who demands that they stop counting votes when he thinks that enough votes have been counted to deliver him a victory. Here is a man who encourages his supporters to spill blood in the pursuit of stealing him power. So even now, after all these years, the journalistic class or the journalist class is almost entirely ill-equipped to converse about this. Even journalists I like and respect will say things like, well, of course, Kamala Harris isn't perfect. In balance, I mean, it's true to say Kamala Harris isn't perfect, goodness knows. But in the context of what Donald Trump is, Kamala Harris's flaws are largely irrelevant, entirely irrelevant. In the context of abject depravity, the notion of fallibility is meaningless. And yet here we are again. And you hear those little things that just reassure you that you're not the one going mad. He's complaining that Fox won't repeat his lies. And the last time Fox repeated his lies, they got fined $787 million. So I think we're back to the very first question we asked about him, which is, if he shot someone on Fifth Avenue, why wouldn't he lose a single vote? 0345 6060 973. Because when he said it, you thought, what did you think? Yeah, well, come on. I mean, we're not like automata. We're not complete. There might be a few idiots out there who love the racism so much that they'll forgive him anything. There might be a few idiots out there who love whatever it is he sells so much that they'll forgive him anything. But when you have seen the incontrovertible evidence of his corruption, up to and including a kind of incitement almost to murder, his own vice president, the idea that we're still sitting here having conversations about it. And I'll have a look in a minute because everyone likes Idiot's Corner. There'll be people in this country, quite a lot of people. Didn't Honest Bob Jenrick come out and say that he wanted Donald Trump? Liz Truss has said that she wants... be afraid. Be very afraid. You want to sound like a film poster. Because you can't be anything other than repulsed by his depravity unless you are attracted by it. There's no hinterland, is there? You are either repulsed by lies, theft, sexual assault, rape, criminality, or you're attracted by it. People like Liz Truss, Honest Bob Jenrick, you have to presume, Boris Johnson, you have to presume they are attracted by the multiple felonies, by the adjudicated rape, by the self-confessed serial sexual assaults, by the abuse of military veterans' families, brackets, if they're Muslim, close brackets, by the lies about immigrants. You're either repulsed by it or attracted by it. You can't really be ambivalent. And yet journalists, of course, have to pretend or have to aspire to ambivalence. They have to aspire to both sides. They have to aspire to balance. So if Donald Trump did shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, much of the American media would in the same bulletin report that Kamala Harris once got a parking ticket in Delaware. That's the maddest thing from doing what I do for a living and watching other people doing it. It's extraordinary to see that attempt at balance. It makes that story I've told you a billion times about having to ask Andrea Leadsom what she thought about the World Trade Organization after the former Director General of the World Trade Organization had told me what he thought was going on. I mean, the madness of thinking that you have to balance out an expert with an idiot. But in the context of Trump, if he did shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, I swear to you, I'm not even exaggerating. CNN and the rest of them would be carrying a story about Donald Trump shooting someone on Fifth Avenue and Kamala Harris getting a speeding ticket in Delaware, as if the two were somehow interchangeable or as if the two were somehow yin and yang. So we're still where we were at the very beginning. How come he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single vote? 0345 6060 973. Whereas if Kamala Harris were to have one bad interview or one bad debate, an awful lot of the people who support her would hemorrhage, not to Trump, but to this sort of middle ground, this hinterland. It's extraordinary. And I think, what is it, power? Is there something ties in with the conversation we had in the royal family, about the royal family in the first hour of the programme? What does it speak to? Because you're either feeling it and sending me texts telling me you can't wait until You can drink my liberal tears or something, which is great. Everyone needs a hobby. So you either feel it or you will never feel it. But what is it that they feel? I understand self-interest. I understand why J.D. Vance has gone from calling him America's Hitler to being his vice presidential running mate. That is pure, naked ambition and greed. I understand why people like Elon Musk like him, because people like Elon Musk are never going to be happy. They sadly labour under the illusion that if they could just be a tiny little bit richer, a tiny little bit more powerful, then suddenly they'd be happy. And they think Donald Trump will help them get richer, help them get more powerful. They're probably right. I get that. But an ordinary person? Quite a few of you cross with me for underestimating the racism. Lee says, only a few racists, James. Seriously? They had a civil war to keep slavery only a few generations ago. The USA is massively and proudly racist. And it probably does come close to boiling down to that. It also explains why support for him in this country is much, much smaller and disproportionately high among Reform Party supporters and Reform Party voters. That the idea of racism as being a political force is probably something we're a little bit too highfalutin about. I feel like we're sort of getting our hands dirty if we start talking about it. But Trump, is it that? Can it really be that simple? That all he does is tell people that it's okay to be racist? And that's such a massive ticket that they'll forgive anything and everything else? Because even that is mealy-mouthed, right? Because it can't be that. It's not that, I love the fact he lets me be racist again, therefore I'll forgive him all the rape stuff. I don't think it is. I think that the power is. It's interesting how the gender divide is breaking down now, if the polling is correct, and women are turning away from him in their droves. But why? Nothing's changed. You heard that tape the first time round. You know exactly what he is, exactly how he thinks of women. Do some women like to be thought of like that? I can get my head around the idea of men who would like to behave like Donald Trump behaves. We heard about a few of them in the last hour of the programme, didn't we? But just that impenetrability of it. And the more you think about it, the more you wax lyrical about it, the more you wang on about it, the more shocking it is to come back to that simple observation about Fifth Avenue. What did he know that we didn't understand? There's the question for you. 20 minutes in, it's a new record. 0345 6060 973. When Donald Trump said, very early on in his political career, that he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single vote, what did he understand that I didn't? I was going to say that you didn't, but in order to ring me, perhaps you did. I'll say we, or I'll say so many of us. I sound like him now. I'm doing the weave. So when Donald Trump said that he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, in other words, he could publicly commit an epic crime and not lose a single scintilla of support. What did he understand that we didn't? Because I am so embarrassed to admit that I still don't understand. What did he get then in that moment that's still true now and which I still don't understand? 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 23 minutes after 12. So he lied last time and he's getting another bite of the cherry and he is lying again.
They found, as I understand it, I mean, I don't know what's happened in the last day or so, but in Lancaster, they found 2,600 ballots, all done by the same hand. In other words, the same exact penmanship, the same hand, the same everything. It was all done by the same pen, the exact same pen. And then they go and they say, well, this is a conspiracy theorist. It's a terrible thing that's happened to our country. And the whole world watches it.
So just like the whole world watched on January the 6th. So that's obviously a lie. And then the other clip I played you was him complaining that Fox News aren't promoting the lies like they did last time, for which there are 787 million reasons. Fox News, that's the payout they had to make to the manufacturer of the vote counting machines. It is so extraordinary even now, to reflect upon the fact that there is no argument against the obvious depravity of Trump. It's there. It's 100 feet high. And yet, from Boris Johnson to, Bob in the Boondocks, they don't care enough about the bad stuff. So what's the good stuff? Why did he know from the very start that he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single vote? Tanya's in Tewkesbury. Tanya, what would you like to say?
Good afternoon, James.
Hello,
it's heavy because this is the day that I'm actually voting and I've got my ballot in front of me. So being a dual citizen, I'm going to vote while I'm talking to you.
Wow. That's exciting. Is that allowed?
Yeah, of course it's allowed.
Good.
I mean, as long as it's stamped by tomorrow.
Just let me check your penmanship. It's the exact same pen. Sorry, carry on.
And actually, he's fifth on the list. There's quite a lot of candidates. Kamala Harris is first. There's a bunch of them. And there's also, as I was telling Eleanor, there's a whole bunch of measures for California that I need to go through, and I can't do them all.
Okay.
But your question,
yes.
Which is, how did he get away with it? And my answer, because he always has, probably all his life, he's got away with the lies. Whether it's a casino in Atlantic City where he didn't pay for a whole bunch of stuff, didn't pay contractors, and it was too expensive to go after him, so people lost out. I don't know how it started, but then your question is probably going, I don't want to anticipate it. Well, sure. Why would people go along with that? And as much as I've wrestled with this, and I just got back from California, I went in September, and it was beautiful, by the way, is that I hate to say this, I really do, but I do think a lot of it does come down to racism.
Why do you hate to say it? Because it's bleak and depressing.
It's because I don't want it to be.
It's also a bit simple. It's a bit simplistic, isn't it? Oh, everyone that doesn't agree with me is a racist. Well, stop doing racist things and you won't be called a racist.
Maybe not just racist. Look at the people he mocks, people who he perceives as weaker than him, like the journalist you mentioned.
Yes.
Okay. Or he goes after immigrants. They don't look like him. Well, thankfully, no one looks like him.
They're eating the dogs. They're eating the cat. It is these moments of madness that you presume will see the scales fall from everybody's eyes. And, of course, he knows that they won't. They never will.
They won't. And I think, as I said, the reasons that I've wrestled with, because I would like to appreciate people who vote differently from me and not just say, well, I hate you because you're a Trump voter. I don't want to be that person.
Sure.
But look at the two previous elections we had before he was in the running. I didn't have any animosity towards Mitt Romney. I thought he was a little, wrong on many things. The same with Dick Cheney, and they both conceded with grace when the election was called, incidentally, before the California polls closed, because that's just how it goes. Yes. California's behind, time-wise, not in any other way. We're okay with everything else. We're not perfect, but we're not that bad.
So it's a game between two teams who agree on what the rules are and recognise the same pitch, and they might, bite chunks out of each other until the whistle blows, but they can go for a half-time, they can go for a drink together after the game. That's gone. That's gone in Britain and America now for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
And part of it is the fact it's maybe not racism, except insofar as all racism is lies. It's the fact that mainstream politicians have given people permission to pretend that lies are true.
It's shocking, but while I've got you here, are you ready for this? My mark is going on Kamala Harris.
Oh, you've surprised? No way. I had you down as Trump all day long.
I'm doing it right now. It's done.
Look at
that. I've still got a bunch of other measures to do, but it's done. I've got to get it in the mail today.
Well,
so.
Don't let me keep you.
Moment of history.
There it is, a moment of history. A vote for Kamala Harris live on this programme. And I do this for a living. I look into an awful lot of stuff and find the people who will be going, oh my God, I can't believe she's voting for Kamala. I don't know that I'll ever understand you, but I'll never stop trying. And I guess that's one major difference as well, is that I just get that moment where you think, well, I don't want it. That's what Tanya means when she says it. I don't want it to just be the racism. So what else is it? What does he offer that people like? 12:30 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And, of course, this mystery today is built upon the fact he's shown us in glorious Technicolor on live television exactly what happens when he loses elections, and they've let him run another one. They've let him fight another one. And he's already making noises that don't just suggest, but scream from the rooftops that January the 6th might turn out to be a rehearsal, might turn out to be a trial run. If he takes a lead and declares victory when no one else agrees that he's won, I don't know what's going to happen to America. And that's why this conversation is simultaneously serious and surreal, because it's as plain as the nose on your face, and yet half of America won't see it. Amelia Cox is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:33. I think this is quite significant. This is from Julie, who's in York, who says, my husband refuses to talk about him now. I try to get to the bottom of why he likes him, as in her husband, and he says the Democrats aren't perfect either. I think it's because they can't really say it out loud. That's why this desperate attempt to remind everybody that Kamala Harris is fallible, and no one's ever claimed otherwise. Same with Joe Biden, although I, for the record, think and said at the time that getting rid of him was the correct decision, or encouraging him to walk the plank was categorically the correct decision. You say, what is it that you like about him? All you can say now is, well, the Democrats aren't perfect either, or he's better than Kamala Harris. Is it different in America? We had a caller last week who'd spoken to his neighbour. You say, what is it that you like about him? Because I keep hearing how awful she is. It's his only campaign now is she's awful. He's cast aspersions on everything about her. So what is it that he's got that's appealing? I don't think you can say it out loud now, because everything you say, you could respond by saying, well, hang on a minute, he's a convicted felon. Hang on a minute, he's an adjudicated rapist. Is it different in America? If you say in America, if you're listening to me in the States at the moment and you know somebody who likes him, what is it that they like? 0345 6060 973. Jeff, I don't want to keep you unduly, but I'm going to read through a selection of things that I think are incredibly pertinent to what we're talking about. So here's Tina bidding to get into Idiot's Corner. She says, unless one supports O'Brien's view, it's pointless to call in. An echo chamber is what he propagates. So what I'm going to do for you, Tina, is remind you of what some very, very senior members, erstwhile senior members of Donald Trump's inner circle have said. So this is why it remains so utterly impenetrable, because it's not as if Barack Obama staffers are queuing up to condemn Donald Trump. Let me run you through people like his former vice president, Mike Pence, who said, the American people deserve to know that President Trump asked me to put him over my oath to the Constitution. Anyone who puts himself over the Constitution should never be president of the United States. Donald Trump's Attorney General, Bill Barr, said someone who engaged in that kind of bullying about a process that is fundamental to our system and to our self-government shouldn't be anywhere near the Oval Office. Donald Trump's Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, said, Donald Trump is the first president in my lifetime who does not try to unite the American people, does not even pretend to try. Instead, he tries to divide us. Another Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, I think he's unfit for office. He puts himself before country. His actions are all about him and not about the country. And then, of course, I believe he has integrity and character issues as well. The top general under Donald Trump's presidential administration, Mark Milley, no one has ever been as dangerous to this country as Donald Trump. He's a total fascist. Trump's own Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson. Trump's understanding of global events, his understanding of global history, his understanding of US history was really limited. It's really hard to have a conversation with someone who doesn't even understand the concept for why we are talking about this. Trump's ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley. Republicans know what a disaster Donald Trump has been and will continue to be. They are just too afraid to say the truth out loud. His presidential transition chairman, Chris Christie. I'm not voting for Trump because I know him too well and he is wholly unfit to be president in every way you can think of. Trump's national security advisor, H.R. McMaster. We saw the absence of leadership, really anti-leadership, and what that can do to our country. Former national security advisor, John Bolton. Trump is unfit to be president. Trump really cares only about retribution for himself. Former chief of staff, John Kelly. A person that has nothing but contempt for our democratic institutions, our constitution, and the rule of law. There is nothing more that can be said. God help us. I could go on, and I might, But I'll pause briefly to find out what Jeff in Reigate has to say. Jeff, what's going on?
Hi, James.
Hello,
long-time listener, first-time caller.
Welcome aboard.
Great work, by the way. I think the thing I've come to be very aware of over the last couple of weeks, and I think that the thing that Donald Trump knows, to answer your question from a few minutes back,
yes,
is that mainstream media will normalise him in the way they talk about him. Not when they're reading out headlines like or quoting some of the people you just mentioned, but when they're just generally reporting on the election, they'll talk about him as just a normal candidate. And so, I've listened to mainstream media this morning and the last few mornings in the UK, and you'd think they were both, from the language being used by some really smart journalists on top 10 podcasts and prominent breakfast shows. If you listen to just 5 minutes of them analysing the election, you'd think they were just two normal candidates. And I think the idea is that
yin and yang, two sides of the same coin. Well, how different? How would you do it differently? How would you do it differently?
Well, I think you need to predicate what you're saying by some of the facts you just pointed out. So, convicted 34 times convicted felon, sexual predator, a compulsive liar, Donald Trump. You should
sought to steal the last election. His former vice president has revealed that he asked him to betray the Constitution. The parentheses are too big. The caveats are too long. So instead because people can't pick and choose, what's the most egregious thing he's done? And we'll mention that every time we mention him, because people can't agree on what the most egregious thing he's done is. They end up not mentioning anything.
I mean, how many convictions? If you just listed the convictions for relatively two candidates, that would be impartial and also pertinent. They call him ex-president, but they don't call him convicted felon. So it's a normalisation effect. I think he knows that, he understands that, and that's why he said the thing about Fifth Avenue.
Except he said that before we saw how awful he is. So he knew even before.
Well, I think he studied Putin and some of Putin's strategists, maybe Vladimir Surkov, people like that, to go back a bit. I think he understands that about media, if not much else. Also with his
people talked about the World Wrestling Federation as being an example where everything is showbiz and flim-flam, and he understood that in a way that perhaps we should have paid a little bit more attention to at the time.
Absolutely. And things like, he started wearing black and gold in the last week with his black and gold. And obviously they're the colours of the Proud Boys. But people are sort of not mentioning that. They're just remarking, he's got a black and gold cap on. But they're not mentioning that happens to be the colour of the Proud Boys, and that
so he's sending a message. He's sending a coded message again to the people who are at least prepared to publicly own their racism and their white supremacism.
Absolutely. Why else would he suddenly switch to a black blazer and a gold tie? But
I don't know. It's chicken and egg, isn't it? As well, and the understanding how the media would work. Versus being depraved. When he made the comments about Fifth Avenue, expressing surprise, possibly as opposed to predicting the future, but knowing it was true. I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single vote, and here we are, with almost every single senior member of his administrations queuing up to condemn him. Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, I think he failed at being the president when we needed him to be that. Communications Director Anthony Scaramucci, he is the domestic terrorist of the 21st century. Press Secretary Stephanie Grisham, I don't think he's fit for the job. He's on a revenge tour. Education Secretary, what was happening on January the 6th and didn't see the president step in and do what he could have done to turn it back or slow it down or really address the situation. It was just obvious to me that I couldn't continue. Betsy DeVos. And these are all appointees or allies, and not people he inherited, people that he elevated. And here we are. Claire's in Brighton. Claire, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I just called in because you were saying, what is it that Donald Trump, why do people support him? And a really close friend of mine who is from Florida, she's just moved back to the UK. She's got a British husband and 3 children who were born here. She moved back to the US about 5 or 6 years ago because her parents are still there. And so they decided they would continue their life over there. But they've moved back again this year because they're appalled essentially by the fact that a lot of people in the community that they're from, which is quite an affluent one,
yes,
are all voting Trump. And the reason they give, and they're very honest and open about it, is the fact that he'll cut tax. And he's and I think like the state of people in general is become very insular. The country has kind of become much less about the whole country as a whole, and just about your specific neighbourhood and your friends, and kind of protecting your own in a way. And they can afford things like healthcare, and they can afford other things. So it's
so he's promising them more money, pay less tax,
yeah,
but it's not enough, is it? And this is why your friends have moved back, because even if he loses, and even if he doesn't ignite America in the way that he tried to last time, and January the 6th turns out to be a dress rehearsal, you're still living with people who, in the best case scenario, is that their personal greed is big enough to outweigh their concerns about everything from women's sexual autonomy right through to racism and sex offending. So, even if they're telling the truth and they're saying, oh no, it's all about the economy, it's all about taxes, that is big enough to them, they claim, to overshadow all of the depravity. And that is not a country you'd want to live in, really.
No, and it's been a kind of slow burn over a few years that people have become in this sort of way, and they've almost apologised for each other and the neighbours, and they're like, as long as I agree with my neighbours, it's kind of allowed and accepted as an opinion. We don't have to worry about the people like over the fence or anything like that.
No,
which is
and that, I guess, is that was nearly the phone-in that we had, but I didn't want to tempt fate with regard to the result. But the idea of something that fundamental has changed in the way that we view humanity. In your friend's case, their neighbours, the numbers here, the percentages here are a lot less bleak than they are in America. But you know how it works. Rupert Murdoch decided that he wanted people to be more supportive of Donald Trump in this country. He'd get his tanks on our lawns by tea time. The usual suspects would start parroting all the nonsense that he put into their breakfast muffins, and we'd all be waving MAGA flags by breakfast time tomorrow. Not all of us, obviously, but could you bring it to a 50-50 split in this country? I wouldn't bet 50p on saying no to that. I would have done once. I would have done 5 years ago. I definitely would have done 10 years ago. Pogroms, turning neighbour upon neighbour. We've seen that happen in this country. Seen people setting fire to hotels containing humans because of the interventions of disgusting human beings, some of whom are actually politicians now. So that's what's changed for me. Donald Trump has made it clear that all the stuff I thought could only happen in history books could happen in the here and now. And that's where the mystery deepens, because you're thinking, well, everyone can see what you can see. I thought everyone hated that stuff. And then you think, well, how do you think these evil people came to power in the first place in the history books? Because enough people let them. It's a charitable analysis. Because enough people wanted them to, is the grim and unavoidable truth. The time is 12:46. Turn our attention to an extraordinary story emerging from Benjamin Netanyahu's government in Israel after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:49. This is interesting. My ex-husband, brackets X for a reason, chairman of a huge international company in Dallas, hates Trump, but is going to vote for him, just as he did last time, because of the promise of cutting taxes, just like the lady said about her friend. As I said, he was X for a reason. So that's the best case scenario, is that your personal greed, as someone who's already won the lottery of life in terms of personal wealth, but your greed is still such that you will overlook all the bad stuff in pursuit of the payout, in pursuit of the profit. Extraordinary. We're going to cross next to Jerusalem, where the freelance journalist Noga Tarnapolsky is on the line, and who is poised to share with us details of it's an extraordinary story, Noga, by any measure, and I think it probably merits you talking us through it from the very top, if that's all right with you.
Yes, good afternoon. It is really a story worthy of kind of Cold War cinema. So about 3 days ago, Israeli journalists began hearing rumors that a spokesman for Prime Minister Netanyahu was under arrest and suspected of espionage. In other words, he wasn't arrested and, being held in a police detention facility. He was under arrest in a high security facility and held by the Shin Bet kind of, I think, sort of the MI5, right, of equivalent.
Yes.
And immediately there were major demands to lift a gag order over this story. So for now, the gag order has been partially lifted. What we know is that there are 5 people under arrest. 4 of them are Israeli army officers, and at least one of them is an officer in the intelligence division of the Israeli army. They're accused of something that is being referred to as espionage in the legal documents, but I have to tell you, at least by my layman's terms, it really does sound like wartime treason. The accusation is astonishing, and it is that Netanyahu brought into his office about 2 weeks after the war started, so October 2023, a person who he called his military spokesman, someone to debrief on military matters, separate from all the spokespeople of the Defense Department and of the IDF. Now it appears that this guy's role was to act as a trafficker of stolen intelligence material, so removed from basically the vaults of IDF intel, handed over illicitly to the Office of the Prime Minister, to this person. His name is the only name released, Eli Feldstein.
Yes.
The accusation is that this top secret material, which revealed sources and methods that we're also authorized to say, meaning it endangered lives. According to the court order, it says that this material was then manipulated. So it was somehow, distorted so as to sell a particular political position, and that these falsified stories based on genuine intel were then implanted into foreign media, one of which is the Jewish Chronicle. And the understanding is that this manipulation of the information occurred in the office of the Prime Minister.
Thank you for steering us through such choppy waters with such aplomb. The phrase "a breach of national security caused by the unlawful provision of classified information" is crucial, but also the phrase "it harmed the achievement of Israel's war aims," because the bit that's missing from your description so far is that it is believed that the war aim in question was the release of the hostages still held by Hamas at the time.
Right. So this is a really important question, and actually we have advanced a little bit there. So Israel began this war with 3 formal aims of war, and that's actually a legal term.
Yes.
So one was destroying Hamas, one was restoring Israeli deterrence on its borders, and one was the release of hostages. That's a formal aim of the war. The accusation is that these documents were manipulated and implanted in foreign media with the aim of scuttling talks. And remember that at the time we're talking about, which is early September, the United States and Qatar were handling a possible hostage release and ceasefire deal that had been proposed by Netanyahu himself. And the American president at the time said, we're very, very close to a deal. And then these weird stories began coming out in the Jewish Chronicle, in Bild, in a journalist here in Israel called Amit Segal, who's very friendly with the Prime Minister. And what these stories aimed to kind of implant in the public discourse was that it would harm Israel's war effort if this deal were signed. So the exact opposite. In other words, when the courts say that an aim of the war, a formal aim of the war was harmed, or that's the suspicion,
yes,
that's a really, really serious thing.
Because it essentially prolongs the incarceration of the hostages. So the government. I mean, if all of these allegations are true, the accusation is that they jeopardized the safety of the hostages because they were so keen to continue the war.
It's even worse. It means that hostages may have been killed as a result of this maneuver. It means that soldiers may have been killed because of the sources and methods revealed by the implantation of these documents. And we know for a fact that the war aim the court refers to is the lives of the hostages, because a woman called Einav Tsangauker, whose son is a hostage, requested leave from the court to offer testimony. This is still on Saturday.
Yes.
As a quote, interested party in the case. So that's how we know that the court admits that the danger to the war effort has to do with hostage families, because she's considered an interested party.
Wow. One thing that struck me is that the reports in the Israeli media followed the reports in the Jewish Chronicle and the German tabloid Bild. So this sort of chain of, I don't know what you'd call it really, but the trail, if you like, that allegedly began in Benjamin Netanyahu's office, went back to Israel via the Jewish Chronicle, who of course retracted the article that you're referring to and fired the quotes journalist, end quotes, who wrote it.
That journalist actually ended up not existing. Which is a pretty dramatic thing itself.
I thought I got a text off his wife, Noga.
Well, maybe, but he is not who he purported to be. Let's say that.
Wow.
He said he had served in the army in certain roles. He said he had a role at the Tel Aviv University, that he was an academic. None of that turned out to be true, and it's unclear who wrote this.
The current administration at the Jewish Chronicle, of course, was put in place by a man called Robbie Gibb, who remains a non-executive director of the BBC, where he routinely lectures other journalists on issues like impartiality and bias. But we live in strange times. Did you?
Yeah. It's thanks to you.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. That could take your time. Do you think that this will change anything? I know you're asked routinely whether or not Netanyahu will walk away from this, and you didn't think that he'd survive the events of October the 7th. But do you think that this is potentially a game changer?
You know, I don't want to risk making a fool of myself again.
No.
But it is a game changer no matter what, because, I mean, it's hard to even think of something to compare it to. A long, long time ago, I think in the 70s in Germany, there was something called the Guillaume Affair, where an advisor to the West German Chancellor was caught having been a spy for East Germany, and the Chancellor resigned over this scandal. So we're facing something of that magnitude here. And the question that is interesting Israeli media right now is it possible, as the Prime Minister's office is trying to imply, that just by random luck, some rogue intel officers in the Israeli army happened to come upon the private number of the spokesman of the Prime Minister and surreptitiously gave him info? Or should we understand, as one of the lawyers, one of the defense lawyers of one of these implicated men said, that there was a pipeline set in place by the Prime Minister's office to illicitly receive top secret information. And one more thing I wanted to add.
Of course.
The reason that Israeli media followed the Jewish Chronicle and Bild is because this material could not be published in Israel because it was top secret information that didn't pass the military censor. So the way that apparently the office of the Israeli Prime Minister got around that problem is by having it published abroad, so that Israeli media then could say, well, this is what's published abroad.
Noga Tarnapolsky, you weren't exaggerating, I don't think, and I suspect we'll be catching up sooner rather than later on this story, and no doubt others as well. But thank you for doing such a sterling job of making a very complicated and febrile situation so easy to understand. I should tell you, actually, not just Noga, but everybody listening, that the Jewish Chronicle in London have just published an article about this very story under the headline "Netanyahu aide arrested after Secret Service's probe alleged leak from inside PM's office," and it contains, as we've alluded to, the line, "The Jewish Chronicle apologised for the article, removed all stories written by Elon Perry, who had exaggerated aspects of his CV and severed ties with the freelance journalist." It's just gone 1 o'clock. You have been listening to James O'Brien on LBC. If you missed any of the show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can pause, rewind live radio, and listen to a range of podcasts. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick back in the chair at 4 on LBC, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.